We're still waiting for some individuals, but April, do you think I don't want it to get too late and I don't want to lose our time with Dr. Weber. So do you think we should get started?
I do, yeah.
Okay. Jade, I think you've already done the one thing that we were going to start with, the recording, so thank you. I think we'll get started. My name is Kathleen Callahan. I'm a director of philanthropy for the American Cancer Society, and I want to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Advancing Cancer Research Council. We've got a group with us today, and I will say we're expecting some more, so we may have some movement through the call, but we're just thrilled to have folks with us today. A couple of things. We're joined by a number of different groups of folks. We've got individuals that are current members of the ACRC. Thank you for being part of the ACRC and for your support for this work and research at ACS. And we also have some individuals that are going to join us for the 24-25 year, as well as some individuals who are new to the idea of the Advancing Cancer Research Council. So we're seeing this hour as a time for everyone to kind of learn both about Dr. Weber and his work, the work of the American Cancer Society, and this opportunity to support research at ACS. We're also joined by some of my colleagues across the North region who also work in philanthropy. And I will mention Lisa Stein, who served as our regional director for philanthropy, who's previously been on these calls, is no longer with ACS. She is with another organization, and we miss her, but we are excited to fulfill some of this work that she's done previously with building the Research Council, and we miss her. But I just wanted to mention that as kind of part of our work. I will say too, as we get through this, overall, we'll have a slide presentation up right now for a number of minutes, and we are asking folks to stay on mute, which I think we're almost there. And during the presentation with April Zubik and my colleague and Dr. Weber, I probably will ask folks to actually take you off of video. So if you can turn off your video when we get to that portion of the presentation. I think that's the housekeeping and the introductions. So again, welcome. You know, we're just thrilled to have this opportunity to have time together to talk about some of the work that's happening within the research area and pillar of the American Cancer Society. I think you can go to the second slide, Jade. There are a number of you that are very familiar with ACRC and have been members for a number of years, but for those of you that are new, we just want to talk a little bit about what ACRC is and the opportunity that it provides. I'm not going to read the slides, but I can just say this is a group of individuals that are really passionate about our work in cancer research, and we're thrilled to be able to connect individuals with some of the work that's happening for the organization, and those opportunities to meet with researchers like Dr. Weber, those involved with the research that we select on a yearly basis, because it's just really exciting to hear what's happening in labs and what is the potential for ending cancer as we know it for everyone. And the impact that we're able to create collectively is really going to help researchers and what they're looking to do with the future of cancer treatments and hopefully the end of cancer. We'll go to the third slide. Yeah, fantastic. The thing that I find that's just wonderful about the ACRC is that this group comes together and collectively makes a decision on what interest they have in some of the research that we present. So in the last year, we changed the cycle to moving between January to December to April to March, because that better fits with the way in which the American Cancer Society awards grants to researchers within the United States. And when we announce those grants, they're in April, and it allows this group to be the first to decide what is it that we're excited about and what do we want to support and what do we want to learn from for the upcoming year. So it really is all of you making the decision on this and being able to follow this. I know that I've looked at some of the trajectory of the work of the researchers over the last 3 years, and it's exciting to see that we have been part of their success and moving towards the questions they're looking to answer in their own research. And I want to just, sort of share a little bit about the fourth slide is about our current research project. And for those of you that are new, what happened last year in April of 2023, the group came together and selected the work of one of our internal researchers. So typically we are looking at extramural research, which is what Dr. Weber has been a recipient of in the past. And Dr. Reese Pugna is a researcher who is looking at research, who actually works for the American Cancer Society. So we were able to see a project manager from her work in one of our previous calls. And it's just really a great opportunity for us collectively to learn from and hear from these researchers as they're in the lab, as they're working, in this case, to look at cancer history and the cardiovascular disease in older adults. So we will have something new for 24-25, and we're excited for that opportunity. And we hope they'll be able to join us for another year of the ACRC. That's a little bit about us as a group. Again, I'm thrilled that everyone's able to join us, but really, I think you're here because we're all excited to have Dr. Weber and April have a conversation about Dr. Weber's sort of history of this work and affiliation with the American Cancer Society. So I will pass it on to my colleague April and Dr. Weber. Thank you both for taking the time to have this conversation today.
Terrific. Thank you for that baseline information, Kathleen. I'm really excited that each and every one of you is here today because you are going to hear from one of my favorite cancer researchers, Dr. Weber. Over so many years in my career here, I've been fortunate that Dr. Weber has opened his lab multiple times for me to take people in and hear from him, understand his work and how the American Cancer Society is impacting that. And Dr. Weber does a wonderful job of connecting with people with his work and the impact that it has. So you're really in for a treat. I'm going to do a brief bio, Dr. Weber, first on you to let everyone know who you are. And this is so impressive. Dr. Jason Weber is a professor of medicine, cell biology and physiology and biology at Washington University. He's the co-leader of the breast cancer research program at Siteman Cancer Center and the co-director of the Cancer Biology PhD graduate program in Washington University. Get this, in 2002, he was chosen as a Pew Scholar in Biomedicine, recognizing him as one of the top 20 young scientists in the United States. And to top that off, in 2008, the American Cancer Society named him a research scholar. And in that same year, the congressionally directed research program named him an Era of Hope Scholar and breast cancer researcher, recognizing him as one of the top 5 young breast cancer researchers in the U.S. Dr. Weber serves on the Department of Defense and American Cancer Society grant review boards in the U.S., as well as international cancer grant review committees in Singapore, England, New Zealand, Australia, and Austria. So I hope you get to travel to some of those places, Dr. Weber. He is currently the chair of the Oncology Study Section for NIH and NCI Graduate Student and Postdoctoral Awards. He teaches cancer biology classes in both the graduate and undergraduate schools and was a 10-time recipient of the Distinguished Service Teaching Award for the medical school. He has trained more than 80 undergraduate, graduate, postdoctoral, and junior faculty scientists in his 22 years at WashU, so he has packed a lot in his mentorship. And the goal of his specific cancer research lab, which we will get into, is to understand what drives breast cancer and how to stop it. So that was a mouthful, but I'm so proud to include all of those facts, Dr. Weber. And I hope that everyone here on the call today, as we're going through our discussion, We will have time for Q&A, so jot down your questions on a piece of paper or put them in the chat box. And when we get to that time, I know Dr. Weber will be eager to answer any questions that you have. But Dr. Weber, welcome and thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Oh my gosh, thank you for the invite, April. It's always fun to chat with you.
Always. We've had a lot of good times talking about research. And everyone here today, I think, is new hearing from you. And some people on the call today may have a really good baseline of our research, and some might be kind of new to hearing about some of our work. You've been touched by the American Cancer Society in your career in so many ways. So I'm hoping we can go a little bit through that trajectory from the beginning. Let's start at the beginning. When you were early on in your career, you got a grant from the American Cancer Society. How did that come about? Can you talk about that first grant?
Yeah, so the first grant I had was literally the first year I was an assistant professor at WashU. I had just been recruited up here to run the breast program. I had been doing my postdoctoral fellowship down at St. Jude Children's Hospital and sort of moving away from pediatric cancers into adults. And I had sort of this really crazy idea for a project in breast cancer that I thought really had an opportunity to hit big. And so it was one of those high risk, high reward. And in talking to other faculty members here, they were like, hey, you know, you should really pitch that to the American Cancer Society because they have a program for junior investigators that they really want to take a chance on. And so I wrote it up and sent it in, and immediately, you know, it was a really fast turnaround time, actually. I think it was only 3 or 4 months. In the process, for those of you who don't know, the process at the NIH takes about a year to go from idea to actually funded. So the ACS is really fast. And they loved the idea. They thought it was worth taking a chance. We spent a year on that research project, and it hit big. And so that sort of moved the lab in a very high trajectory moving forward in breast cancer research. And, you know, I think the original grant was, I think, $30,000 from the ACS. So it was sort of one of these small seed grants. It allowed us to do a year's worth of work. And since then, I like to tell people you know, you take that first grant of 30,000 and over the last, I've been here now 23 years come May, it will have turned into $30 million. So it's a 1,000-fold return on investment. And so I think that's why those kind of grants are really, really important to get labs moving. So that was the first one.
It's so impressive too, because we're doing this in 2 cycles every year at the American Cancer Society across the country, starting people's careers. So just for all of the donors on here to know, twice a year, there's stories starting like Dr. Weber's. Tell us where that took you next, because I know ACS is often that first grant that's kind of launching you. Where did you go from there?
Yeah, so we generated a lot of really good data with that grant. Like I said, it took us about a year to finish it, to the point where we went from sort of an idea to now knowing that we were on the right path. And we turned that around quickly into an NIH grant. So right out of the gate, a year later, so 2003, we received a $3 million grant from the NIH to move this work into a much larger scale. And then ever since, we've sort of been building on it piece by piece, from one grant to another, from being a very junior investigator with no real track record to now a senior faculty member, that, you know, we move things now quickly from the lab into the clinic because we sort of have the bandwidth to be able to do that. When you're first starting off, you can't do that sort of thing. And so you have to really keep your eye on the prize. But now we can go off in many, many directions. And so it's a lot of fun taking that journey. And, you know, without that seed money to really plant these hard projects early on, the take a chance projects, you really end up being very safe in your research. And that's sort of a detriment to everybody. We want people to think outside of the box and to come up with great new ideas. And it's just a matter of finding the funding and opportunity for them to sort of take those chances. I mean, not every project is going to hit. It's sort of like, think of scientific mutual fund. You don't need everybody to hit. You just need a few big ones. And so I think that is the model that works best, and that the vision of the ACS is to make these huge leaps in understanding. And I think that's part of the reason why you see so many former ACS funded researchers winning Nobel Prizes, is because these are the folks that took the big risks and got the big payouts at the end. And it benefits everyone.
Yeah, 50. We're to 50 formally funded researchers from the American Cancer Society that have gone on to win that Nobel Prize. We're so proud of that.
That's a crazy number when you think about it.
I don't think any other nonprofit can have a statistic like that, can tout something like that. So we're very proud. And it's a very rigorous process that we go through in choosing who we're going to fund, a two-tier peer review process. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so now I run that grant here at WashU. It's an institutional research grant that provides, right now we hand out 5 of these sort of smaller $30,000 awards each year. And so the review process is, one, we do it internally. And so those are scientists here at WashU that are typically former recipients and sort of want to give back to the process. And I chair that. And we pick what we think are going to be the winners, the projects that are going to make the biggest impact, not only within research, but in sort of patient care, and that are going to lead to, a tremendous payoff in terms of future grants from much agencies like the Department of Defense and the NIH. And then that goes, once we've reviewed that goes up to the ACS for approval. And then those folks have, a year to make that happen. And we give them a lot of guidance. So it's not just that we hand them the money and off they run. I mean, we really work a lot with these junior faculty members to sort of help guide them through the rigors, like you said, of the science, making sure it's top notch, making sure that they don't have the blinders on, that they're thinking about things in a very large and broad array, and that they're also thinking of, if I get to here, what is my next step? I don't want to go incrementally. I want to go in big leaps. I want to move things along quickly. And so we provide them a lot of feedback and guidance over that year of being funded.
Yeah, so what you're talking about now is the institutional research grant, which for everyone on the call, we have multiple institutional research grants at institutions across the country, and that's done within the institution. And I've been able to sit in when you've had that peer review, and it's fascinating. You have incredible mentors. Everyone who's applying for those grants has to have a mentor on their application. And it's very thorough. It's looking not just at the work, but who is the mentor and what is the likelihood of them being successful and then going on to that next thing. It's wonderful. And I think a lot of that is also modeled off of the American Cancer Society's peer review process for every grant that we give. It's not ACS staff reviewing those grants. It is researchers who are volunteering their time on a 2-tier peer review process every single grant that we give. So it is very rigorous. So let's talk about your lab today, because it's obviously very developed. You're doing incredible work. You have a lot of people on your team. Can you bring your current research to life for everyone?
Yeah, I think, over the years, and this, is certainly not unique to myself. It's really a growth process in both trying to figure out, what direction do I want to take my lab? What type of research are we going to do? Are we going to be sort of holistic in the way that we view cancer, or are we going to go after something very specific? And then you know, just like in a business, the lab, my job is really to identify talented individuals who are going to help move these scientific projects forward, both in the lab and then into the clinic. And so at this point in my career, unfortunately, I see myself as a manager of ideas and people more than actually doing the physical science. But that's just a natural transition for faculty members as they get more senior. Yes, I have the ideas and I talk to all the people in my lab, which is around 15 to 18 people that come from all over the world. And this is really hard work that they're doing. They're incredibly dedicated. They don't get paid very well, but they're excited to be doing the work. And so it's a very sort of fulfilling career for them to jump into. And so my lab has sort of progressed into very basic, fundamental ideas about how do cancer cells become cancer cells, and into more of a, okay, we sort of understand that process, the evolution of a normal cell to a cancer cell at a very genetic and molecular level. And now, how can we take all the information and move that back into the clinic to identify some solutions to treating patients? And part of that is right now the lab does a lot with triple negative breast cancer, a super aggressive breast cancer in women across the US. It's disproportionate in African American women. There are no targeted therapies for these women, and so they get some of the worst chemotherapies that you can imagine. They're also incredibly resistant to those therapies. And so they do very, very poorly. The mortality is incredibly high. And so we've sort of taken that initial idea from 23 years ago and moved it and narrowed it down into a very specific type of breast cancer. And so now we have some very unique targets that we're moving into the preclinical models of identifying compounds, partnering with drug companies and trying to move those quick clinic, and also to try to understand, you know, which women that come into the clinic are going to be responsive to these therapies. Because one of the biggest problems in all cancers is, you know, we get these new therapies and we tend to, you know, treat it as sort of when I was in college, spaghetti on the wall. You know, how do you know when your spaghetti's done? You throw it on the wall. If it sticks, it's done. If it slides down, it's not. And so we tend to treat everybody in the clinic the same when they come in with certain cancers. And the response rates reflect that, right? Not many people respond. And so can we be better at identifying who will respond and separating them from who we know won't respond? And then try to take the non-responders and find something new for them. And so that's sort of what the group is working on now. And that has moved us into sort of ER positive breast cancer, most common breast cancer in the US. But only half of the women that get current therapies respond. And we have sort of, one of the pathways we figured out about 20 years ago ends up being a pathway that will identify the women who will not respond. And so the idea is now we need to find something for them. And we can sort of pull them out early, knowing that they're not going to respond to current therapies, and we need to get them something else. And so I think a lot of times for ACS grants, you know, one, we try to fund big ideas, so game changers, if you will, people who are taking sort of, I like using sports analogies. It tends to resonate with a lot of folks from around the world. But, you know, taking half-court shots instead of layups. That's really, I think, where the ACS's bread and butter is, picking people who are going to take really good shots and that are going to change the way we think about problems, both in science and in the clinic. And so that's what we try to do through the IRG and through sort of coaching young faculty into the ACS Scholars Program, is sort of figure out who has the best shot and try to put more resources behind those people to give them better opportunity.
It's just a comment on the dedication and hard work of the people of your lab. I believe one time when we were walking through, there was a mention of bathroom facilities with showers because sometimes lab tests go overnight and students or researchers are spending the night in the facility to watch that project too through the completion of it. So it really is true. It's fascinating when you walk through. Another thing that I've recognized that you've done a lot over the years is your collaboration with other researchers and other labs on your floor, on other floors who may be working on a different type of cancer. I think it'd be interesting for people to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think one of the, if you ever get a chance to visit a lab, highly recommended. It sort of gives you the, as my wife called it, the first time she saw my laboratory was sort of the Wizard of Oz pulling the curtain back and seeing, you know, that there's really nothing out of the ordinary. It's just folks that you would meet every day, but they're doing science. And the equipment is quite amazing that we have at WashU. We're incredibly lucky to have such a facility in St. Louis. But there are places all around the country and the world that do the same thing. And so wherever you're at, I would highly encourage you to sort of pull the curtain back and get a chance to see that, meet the people who are actually doing the work. From the collaboration standpoint, we do a lot here internally at WashU on my floor. We're a cancer floor. The labs are set up so instead of being very siloed in individual labs where you're going door to door, it's just one humongous lab. There are around 90 people in total, and if you're ever walking by, it's nothing but, you know, mass inertia of bodies bumping into each other. And so they can't help but talk about the science that's going on. And so we were initially sort of concerned about how that would work, but it's been amazing. And so I think more and more universities and labs around the country are sort of working on that premise of opening things up to making it easier to collaborate with other scientists. And, you know, we have a number of collaborations around the country. I have collaborators out in California and down in Texas and out in Boston. We have a breast oncology collaboration over in Europe in a couple of places. And so it really does allow you to make bigger leaps when you have more and more people involved that have sort of their own ideas and expertise that you can share with each other. And so I think, you know, one misconception, and I get this a lot because I'm not a TikToker, my kids are TikTokers. They've got me hooked on this now, but my feed is all puppies and animals. But they tell me all the time, you know, there are folks that think that scientists just don't talk to each other because they're more interested in finding the discovery for themselves. And I can tell you that's simply not true. There are so many people involved in every aspect of projects that now we're sort of in the era of humongous data sets, whether it is you know, the 1,800 women each year that come through the Siteman for breast cancer treatment, the analysis of their tumors and the data that is associated with them, to genomic sequencing of incredibly large patient data sets. You need more and more scientists to be involved. And so I don't know of a project that is limited to a single lab anymore. Oftentimes, in order to move to the next stage, you need lots and lots of people involved. So it would be my lab and probably 2 or 3 other labs that are working on this, sharing data, sharing information, utilizing now sort of artificial intelligence to move things quicker on the analysis side of things, sort of doing the math for us. And I think it's only going to get bigger. And we're starting to see sort of the emerging fields of multidisciplinary research that I know larger funding agencies are sort of encouraging scientists to get together with. You know, I'm a biologist, so maybe I get together with a chemist and a physicist and an engineer. We have some engineering projects right now in the lab. And so that has really, if anything, broadened the amount of influence that other labs can have on each other. So, and it's fun too. You know, I know enough engineering now to be dangerous, but I'm terrible at math, and so I don't want to do that. I want somebody else to do that for me.
Well, I'm sure that everyone here is very happy to hear about the collaborations that happen. And I've heard that walking through the halls with many different research lab tours. I want to move to a newer area that you're working with the American Cancer Society, which is the Diversity in Cancer Research internship. So for everyone on the call to know, we've established a new Center for Diversity in Cancer Research. Basically, we need diverse individuals going into research, representing research with diverse ideas. And many groups are underrepresented in the cancer research field. So we have a new Diversity in Cancer Research internship program. And Washington University, I believe, was a recipient the very first year. And we've had it a couple years. You are the mentor also for that grant. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I try to emphasize, and many other faculty around the country do, is that diversity in thinking is the way to go. The last you want in the laboratory setting is a bunch of people that are either thinking the same way or they're just going along with what you're thinking. I love interactions with especially younger students who have a difference of opinion or have a different way of looking at things. And so diversity only helps when taking scientific problems and trying to solve them, utilizing every angle. And so, you know, my career has sort of moved into that stage now where mentoring is a big part of that. The lab sort of runs quite well, they joke, without me. And so, you know, the ACS DICER program, the Diversity in Cancer Research, we applied the very first year, primarily because I wanted to give students who were underrepresented in research an opportunity to get that experience and to see if it was something that they would want to think of doing long term. And so it's incredibly, incredibly difficult in general to get young people to think of research as a career. And I think a lot of it has to do with sort of the monetary value that people put behind becoming a physician. Yes, it pays better. It's just a different type of science. And so most underrepresented students typically think of becoming a physician before a researcher. And it's because they don't have the opportunity to see what research is like. And so how do they know if they want to go to a PhD cell biology or cancer biology program if they've never actually done the work? And so that's what this program provides to them. And so we have to have this for 3 years now. We have our 4th cohort coming in this summer. We went from 4 students to 8 students, so it's pretty awesome. And they're all fabulous. This will be 1, 8, 16, 24, 20. So there'll be 28 students that will have been through this program. And 27 of them are still doing cancer research. And so it's pretty darn amazing to have that type of impact. And, you know, I have 2 in my lab that have been with me, one since the very first program. So this will be our 3rd year doing research as an undergrad in my laboratory. She's Hispanic, and the opportunities for her outside of that were nil before this program came into effect. And then the African-American female in my lab, Jillian, she's fantastic. She's an engineer. And so we have her on a sort of biomedical engineering project, happy to talk about later. And she's doing awesome. She actually went overseas this semester for her study abroad in the Netherlands. And I was able to call one of my friends who I knew from a postdoc who's over there. And so she's in a Dutch lab now learning how to do things. She can't speak Dutch, but science is sort of a universal language. But she'll be back this summer. So she's super excited to take what she learned there and bring it into the lab here. And so it's quite an amazing program. And I know we're going to apply this year. The ACS has a new post-bac program. And so this is also for underrepresented minority students. And we're trying to get that started up if we get funded. We'll see. The applications due April 1, so that's all I've been thinking about lately is getting that one in. But it's a great programs.
Well, we're cheering you on, and a couple of our staff were talking before this call. I think a takeaway for us, for all of our donors on the call today, is to share a bit more about the many mechanisms that the American Cancer Society has to develop grants, deliver grants out to cancer researchers, because there's a lot and it's still growing. Just a few more minutes before we turn to Q&A. I wanted to see if you could just talk to the donors for a moment, what the donations mean for cancer research. How competitive is it? How important is it? What would we do without it? All of that sort of thing.
So I would say if you want to see what we would do without it, go back to COVID when we had our labs down for a year. And that included all clinical trials. And when you look at the impact that that had, it was horrific. The pandemic was bad enough, but then sort of the shutting down of labs, of entire research avenues, of clinical trials for patients who had no other avenues was simply devastating. And so, right now we're all on continuing budget resolutions, those of us that have NIH grants, and it is simply decimating labs. I can't hire anybody. I can't have any new projects. We're sort of stuck in the status quo. So every time you see Congress, no matter who's in charge, this has been going on forever, nobody passes a budget. They all pass these continuing resolutions. And so we're stuck neutral. And so nothing happens. And it's really disappointing because disease impacts everybody. Cancer certainly impacts everyone. It doesn't care, what side of the aisle you're on. And so to sort of allow politics to get in the way of doing the work is incredibly frustrating for those of us in the labs. What was the other part of that? Oh, so if you look at the funding rates, they're well under 10% now, especially under the continuing resolution. I think for the National Cancer Institute, the section that I chair, we were at 7%. So imagine that 100 grants come in. Of those, I would say probably 50 of those are super good ideas. We should be totally going for. We're only giving 7 of those a chance. And so we throw away 93 out of 100 grants that come in. And so how do you pick 7 when 50 are meritorious? It's really hard. And the way that the ACS comes in and picks up the research for junior people is, if we didn't have that, the science we would be missing entire generations of researchers, because someone who's brand new and submits a grant to the NIH is essentially competing against me. And not to toot my own horn, but I think that I would probably do better on paper than someone who's just starting off. I have more people, I have more resources, I have more experience. I've done this for 20 something years. And so it's just not a fair fight. And so it used to not work that way because funding was around 25% back in the 80s and 90s. But it's dipped every year since then. And these budget constraints are really taking its toll on basic research.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I will share with a lot of pride that the American Cancer Society is the largest funder of cancer research outside of the federal government. And then when you get to that level, our advocacy arm, the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, is advocating every year at a national level to increase cancer research funding. And you're right about all the problems with the budget. But our voices need to be heard. And so the best thing that we can do there is sending our letters to our senators and our representatives to ask them to do that. They don't read every email, but when they get enough emails on the same subject, they know that people who vote in their district really care about that. So
No, they definitely do. I've spoken with senators from Illinois and Missouri who've come to visit the lab, and quite honestly, they're shocked to know what the impact of their votes are. It's almost as if they don't quite grasp that WashU is not funding research. All right. The ACS, the DoD, the NIH, those are the bodies that fund research. And without that support, it doesn't matter how big our universities are. They simply can't pick that slack up. And I remember the other one was, where does the ACS money go? I mean, look at the 30. I like to break down the money in terms of experiments. And I will always tell donors that every time you go out and get $10 from somebody, it can add up. I tend to think of experiments as every experiment that we could do in the lab to have an impact is around $1,000. And so when I got that $30,000 grant, in that year, we were able to set up 30 really good, rigorous experiments. And some of them hit and some of them didn't, but it was enough to move the concept forward. And so if you break down the amount of money that you can raise into experiments and talk to other donors about not just funding science, but actually funding experiments, tries, ways that can be impactful. You know, we have, with $30,000, we're funding 30 opportunities. With 10,000, you're funding 10 shots. That's a lot of shots. And so I think when you add that all together, that's, I think, the most impactful way of thinking about where your money is going.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to turn to Q&A now. So everyone can feel free to come off of mute. To get us started, Gary, I'm going to start with your question. It was the first one that came in. Gary said he's had the opportunity to sit on an IRG process at Holden Comprehensive Cancer Center in Iowa City. He loved the experience. He comments about the rigor and care of reviewers. The brilliance of the applicants was amazing. Made you feel like as a donor, your funds were being used very effective, productive. He said that a donor said after watching, we should be paying these people what we're paying football coaches. Okay, I guess it was less of a question, more of a comment. Yeah, you're right.
I'm with you, Gary.
Yeah, priorities, right?
So yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, and one of my good friends, Dawn Quell, is at the University of Iowa, and she sort of shares the same sort of commitment as I do to bringing up the next generation of researchers. And I will say that we all know how hard it is to go out and raise money. I mean, we do it a lot for our cancer center. And so we want to find every last dollar that we can to fund as many experiments as we can. And that the rigor on our part is that we don't want to be wasteful at all. And so we know how tight things are. And so every dollar counts. And we're very constructive in the way that we critique each project to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, to make sure it is the most impactful that it can be.
Yeah. Gary went on to say he recently heard a presentation of some of our researchers whose disciplines were in chemistry or biology. They were funded by ACS, resulting in some very exciting discoveries. I don't know. He's wondering if you could comment on that concept.
Yeah, so that's a really good observation, Gary, in that part of the reason why chemists and biologists in general were not sort of at the forefront of cancer research is a lot of the history, the discovery of the first oncogenes. I love history. I tend to teach it from this angle to the undergraduates to sort of put it in perspective to them. So back in this, and I'll be brief, April, don't worry, I'm not going to go into a humongous 1-hour lecture on the history of cancer. But back in the 60s, when Nixon declared the war on cancer, in the late 60s, most of the researchers that were brought into the NCI were virologists by training, for no other reason that they were the first sort of people to graduate from medical school and graduate school, and that were given exemptions to work at the NCI instead of going to the Vietnam War. And so there are a lot of books written about them, and one of them actually is who I trained with down at St. Jude. So I have some great firsthand stories from. But anyways, they all were at the NCI together looking for the origins of cancer. And they were at the same time competing with chemists to figure out what the origin of cancer was. It turned out that the virologists figured it out first, and that led most of the chemists to leave the field of cancer research. And so in the 70s and 80s, then, cancer research was dominated by these former virologists or virus hunters. And the next generation of people like myself came from those labs. And now we are sort of in a quandary where we need the chemists to come back into the fold because we need their expertise. But it's been very difficult because they've gone off and done other things. The Nobel Prize was just given to a couple of chemists on click chemistry, sort of bringing two molecules chemically. And so they've gone in their own direction, and we're just now trying to bring them back. So these are definite problems in cancer research that we are all aware of, and that sort of this national interdisciplinary approach is not only including chemists, but we see more and more mathematicians becoming involved, bioinformatics. I see the next question is on AI. Happy to talk about that as well. And so you see a lot of fields coming into the fold, which to me is super, super exciting, because I don't want to learn chemistry. I hated chemistry as an undergraduate and graduate student. I don't want to learn it. I would like a chemist to come in and just do it. Same with math. And I see Joyce and Mike have the AI next. I'll go ahead and take that, April.
Okay.
So one of the cool things about AI in science is that it can arrive at conclusions much faster than we can. And when I say that, I mean it can assimilate incredibly large data sets in a matter of overnight versus me looking at it for years. So here's an example that we're doing right now. So we have 800 patient samples from women with triple-negative breast cancer who have come through WashU in the past 5 or 6 years. And we have their tumors. And normally I would take that to a pathologist and tell the pathologist, hey, I need you to mark where the tumor is at on these slides before I do any work. Well, that can take a year for them to do 100. So I'm talking about a decade for a pathologist to do that for me. Whereas now we've trained the AI to identify tumor cells within a pathology slide of a tumor. And so I can get it overnight by just telling the AI, hey, identify the cells that look like this. And so then what I can do is I can go in and I can sequence just the tumor cells to see what's wrong with them. And then not only will I have all that information, but then I take it back to the AI and I tell the AI, hey, I want you to look for similarities between all these patients compared to normal tissue that's in the adjacent slide. Or, what are the differences in all these patients? Is there a racial difference? Is there something about their pathology that stands out to you? And so in that way, we've been sort of teaching AI how to work now it's an iterative learning process. So the more samples I can give it that I've annotated, it learns it better than I ever could. And so at the end of the day, not only are we saving a huge amount of time, but we're also probably removing human error from the analysis. So super, super powerful. We're really excited to be going with this. We're one of the first institutes to put it really into practice, and so we're all excited to have it here. And it's primarily because WashU has one of the 3 sequencing centers in the country. And so we have all the reference material to teach AI what to look for.
It's very exciting. Wanted to open it up to the group if anyone wants to come off of mute and ask a question. I know we have one from Kathleen, but I want to give our donors a chance if there's any questions.
Don't be shy.
I know. I'm okay with awkward silence. Yeah. Well, if not, then Dr. Weber, I'll let you take Kathleen's question, and then I'm going to turn it back to Kathleen to wrap it up, but won't give it back to her till I make a last comment. So can you address her question, which was about that first big idea that you talked about in your grant proposal? What was that concept that really got you started?
Yeah, so back then the thinking was that cancers are really aggressive because the cells are dividing incredibly fast. But if you think about that, sort of from just sitting down and chatting, that if cells were dividing too fast, then as they divided faster and faster and faster, those cells should actually get smaller and smaller and smaller. And so no one ever goes to their oncologist and the oncologist says, the bad news is you have cancer. The good news is that the cells have divided so fast that they're infinitesimally small, and so we don't have to do anything. And so our idea was that the rate at which a cell divides must be somehow linked to the rate in which a cell grows. So in order for a tumor cell to divide into 2 equal-sized daughter cells, it has to also grow in size. And so we wanted to focus on the growth side of things. And so we looked at a pathway that's involved in making proteins. And most people did not think it had any role in cancer biology. And the first few experiments that we did proved that fact, that if you inhibited a cell from getting larger, you would actually prevent it from dividing, showing that they were intimately linked together, those 2 processes. So it really opened up, an avenue of research that people just simply weren't thinking about at the time. But also, there are now inhibitors in clinical trial looking at stopping cells from making proteins instead of stopping cells from dividing. And so it was sort of a new paradigm in the way that we think about tumor cells becoming tumor cells. They not only have to divide, become many of tumor cells, but they also have to grow larger in order to divide into the same size cells. And because those are linked, if you screw up either of those, you should be able to prevent cancer. And so that has sort of led us into some pathways that we're studying now in the laboratory, of which one we're getting ready to move into a clinical trial here at WashU for breast cancer patients. And, it was exciting to see that that actually had legs and that it worked. And again, it was around 8 to 10 experiments that showed us, okay, this is actually the way it works. And then we just expanded from there.
Well, Dr. Weber, I would say you are a blessing to the cancer field. And we're so fortunate at the American Cancer Society that you've been a part of our story for several decades now. And that's not going to end until you retire. I know it. But thank you so much for all of your time for today and sharing your passion and your work with our donors who are equally passionate and eager to get things to cancer patients to help immediately. So it's great to hear that you've got some things that are preclinical and about to go to clinical trial, and just appreciate so much everything that you do. Kathleen, I'm going to turn it back over to you now.
Again, thank you, Dr. Weber. I personally, I think I've grown in the last hour in terms of my knowledge of just how this is working and so your experience with the American Cancer Society. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm proud that we're part of the team that's asking for more half-court shots. Because I think ACS is standing there with folks that have those big ideas like what you just explained with your first idea. So thank you so much. I also just want to thank everyone for joining us today and talk just for a minute about moving forward with the Advancing Cancer Research Council and hoping that individuals will join us for the 24-25 season. This is just a summary of some of the parts of being a member of this group. Each individual has made a commitment to the American Cancer Society at the $10,000 level or greater to support research, and together we combine those funds to help support a research project during the year. So it's a really fantastic opportunity for us to be together, to have these experiences with Dr. Weber and others who are doing this work. We are very thankful for all of your support to make this possible. I will say, in following up from this call today, folks from my colleagues are going to reach out just to hear about your impressions of this call. We'd love to hear your feedback from this event and to see if you'll join us for 24-25. If you've already made a commitment for the next year, thank you. We are excited to keep this going and to have folks like Dr. Weber join us in the future so we all can continue to grow in our knowledge about the research that's happening that's funded by the American Cancer Society and to really just kind of work together in that space. Other than that, I think that I've covered it. April, I'm going to look at you just to say if there's anything else. We're right at time here. So I just want to say thank you so much, especially Dr. Weber. Go ahead, April.
Absolutely. And for the members who are part of the council, we will be scheduling a call for the end of April or beginning of May to look at a few options that the group can adopt together for the next research project. So you'll be watching for that as well.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to folks you know from the ACS team. And again, thanks, Dr. Weber, for your time today. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
thank you.